I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and with me is the cinematographer from the Disney Plus series WandaVision, Jess Hall. And Jess, this series, it's actually, I think, your first time working on a series, and you handled all of the episodes for this limited
That's
series.
correct. Yeah.
And you normally have come from a very large film background. So I'm just wondering, what was the biggest way in which you had to adjust your approach? How does it compare to film?
I mean, one of the great appeals was that I was going to do the whole show, because, that's obviously kind of what I'm used to. So that was very enticing to me, and I was very happy that worked out, that it was a single DP and a single director. But I think, really kind of adapting to this 6.5 hour narrative length was definitely something that took some adjusting to. Normally I'll be scribbling in my script, down the very finest details. But, when you've got, 9 scripts to work with, it just requires, a different kind of a prep. And because I'm quite meticulous, that definitely was a workflow that I had to kind of adjust to. But I think one of the great things, the way that Marvel had set it up, was that we did have, a continuous prep and then a continuous shoot, which, although it was very challenging, it did mean that I was able to kind of go in quite deeply for a decent length of time and really build the different looks for the episodes and really figure out how I was going to thread that arc of the narrative throughout the 9 episodes.
Yeah, it seems like this show would have an incredible amount of variety for you because each episode explores a different decade of sitcoms. Does that mean also more work? Like, was each episode you are changing cameras and lenses and lighting for each iteration?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely more work, because normally on a single kind of feature film, I'd really be building one look essentially for the film. You don't want to take the audience out of that. So with this, it's like every episode was a new look. I mean, it's actually 7 kind of looks throughout the episodes, throughout the 9 episodes. So really, I had to kind of go deeply into each period, each decade, build a specific look for that. And the contrasts are pretty great between the periods. So it did require a lot of work in terms of technical organization to make that happen. I made some choices quite early on in terms of how I approached it camera platform wise. And that was to use like one single camera platform throughout the series, rather than changing cameras and maybe like using vintage cameras for vintage episodes. So I didn't do that. So that, in a way, made my process sort of more coherent, I think, and actually simplified it. I'm always a great believer in simplification. And that was one element that I was able to simplify, and I think worked to my advantage. So then it was really kind of going into the color science of the camera, using the different lenses, the different series of lenses to try and, build the visual cues, and also kind of exploring the different types of lighting and the kind of film equipment that was being used for those periods to create those looks.
And a few of the episodes, I think a couple iterations were filmed with a live audience there to truly capture the spirit, which I imagine is a whole different dynamic. Had you ever done that before? What are the challenges for that?
I feel that was probably my biggest challenge, because that episode is very specific look wise. I mean, you're in the 50s, you're in 4:3 black and white. There's all of that to figure out. And then there's the live audience element, which is kind of thrown in there. Our director, Matt Shackman, who was actually, he works a lot in theatre, so he knows the value of a live audience, was very committed to that route, because he knew the kind of energy that could be created by that dynamic. So, I kind of embraced it, and he was a great guide and kind of, teaching me some of the strategies that I needed to approach to get this done. But ultimately, it was really figuring out, how to light that set, how to allow the actors to move around it, and then how to kind of organize the camera coverage so that we could really capture, like either a wide shot and, two shots, or a medium 2 shot and 2 singles. But, engineering that throughout what essentially became like a 24-minute take was quite some challenge. And as in all these cases, we never had quite enough time. So when we came to do this show, I didn't feel like we'd quite nailed all the camera positions. So in the end, I went on kind of live comms with my 3 camera operators, and I had the dimmer board, the lighting desk operator sitting next to me. And to a certain extent, we really did kind of run it live, where I was able to kind of say to the camera operator, go right a little bit, get a little closer, and do some live lighting cues as well, while it was actually happening. And it was an incredibly exhilarating experience. And I think seeing the way that felt on that set, you could never have achieved that any other way, that particular energy. So it was a great strategy from our director to make that choice. And luckily, we were able to pull it off.
Yeah, I think it was worth the effort. I actually had previously talked to Matt, and it seems like he had from the beginning such a clear vision of what he wanted this to be. What was the collaboration like in terms of, what conversations did you initially have with him about the look and the through line of this story?
I think, Matt has what, I think a lot of people coming from theatre have, who then become directors. I mean, there's great traditions of theatre directors becoming great directors. I think especially in England, maybe, but in the US as well. And I think he has a really essential understanding of a narrative arc of a character and of performance. So I always felt completely safe in his hands, that he was able to kind of handle the very subtle transitions that this show involved, and to guide, myself and the rest of the crew through that. So we lent on him pretty heavily for that. And he always had an answer. He's incredibly well organized as a director. So it was really a pleasure to collaborate with him. And I think what he also, has is, a lot of confidence in the people he hires. So, in terms of, the work that I was allowed to do, he really enabled me to kind of go on a deep dive into this, into these different periods, and then to kind of explore the technology and the filmmaking crafts of how I could get these looks. And, it would be a case of like, I'd tell him I was going to, test a bunch of vintage lenses, and I'd open up the vaults of the cupboards at Panavision and pull out these lenses. And then we'd go and sit down and we'd look at the tests, and, he'd tell me what he liked about it. I'd tell him what I liked about it. And then I'd go away and I'd kind of revisit, and I'd, rework and come back and show him the next version. So that's sort of how it went. We just carried on talking and having a really great collaboration right through this whole series, and really kind of revisiting points that were particularly difficult. I think we never have all the answers to all the problems. And I think what was great about Matt's approach was that he was able to, offer up a solution, but also to revisit that solution if he'd gone back and thought about it, or if I had questions, that opened up other avenues. And so some of the aspect ratio changes, for example, we were debating those, right up to the moment of shooting. And even sometimes when we were shooting, we were protecting for 2 options, because, we weren't quite sure exactly where those transitions would happen. But, I remained involved in the, in the previs process, in the storyboarding process, with Matt. And, it's a very, intricate kind of engagement in terms of collaboration, as it was with Mark Worthington, our production designer, and our costume designer, Maze Rubio. We all as a team really kind of gelled. I pitched up for the first kind of 4 weeks of my prep in the art department, because I was there with Mark, seeing exactly what he was able to do, talking about the sets, looking at the sets in miniature models, looking at them in, CAD, in 3D, and thinking about the kind of lenses we were going to use, building color palettes with him, and with Maze. So, we'd all meet kind of regularly as a team, and discuss what we were all doing in our individual departments. And I think that level of, interaction and cohesion was really essential to building these looks, which, is an integrated, complete experience, which is what we wanted to kind of transport the viewer into this other world, so that when we take them out of it, it's all the more powerful.
Yeah, you mentioned those aspect ratio changes, because when they enter the real world, it goes into a more of a widescreen format, and that seems like a difficult thing to navigate. But did that feel more at home to you, that like real world because of the film background you have?
Well, I think, for me, it really came out of the script, which was, this idea of, Wanda's hacks, you're in this kind of reality and outside is this other reality. How was I going to really communicate that to the viewers? Because elements of this were quite confusing. It's an incredibly complicated story, and so I wanted a few kind of key signifiers for the audience to be able to tell them where they were, in the various worlds, if you like. So one of the kind of clear distinctions was sort of the inside the hex and outside the hex. And I like the idea with the lensing of, going to this kind of cinematic 2:4 aspect ratio that we know from the great Marvel movies. And, it's familiar, and I think it tells the audience kind of where they are. And by using anamorphic lenses, I was actually sort of changing the perspective and the experience of the two-dimensional image, and kind of just significantly kind of telling the audience you're entering a new space. And it's also a space that is kind of familiar to them from the other movies. So even if only subconsciously they could kind of connect with that, it was sort of an important distinction to make. But yes, in a certain respect, I sort of knew more where I was with that material. The kind of lighting was in a way sort of more practical, more cinematic, but still we wanted to kind of build our own language there. So again, like working very closely on the details with, we built a lot of practical lights from scratch with Mark Worthington and installed them in the various locations, and, still trying to give the show its own identity. And also, and that material was kind of balanced with the other looks, so it was a real balancing act across the series to make it feel both different in the different eras, stroke kind of situations, and also coherent.
Yeah, I am wondering too, in the real world, the final episode has these epic battles, which are awesome the way they're shot. But so much of it, suddenly there's a lot of visual effects and
Yeah.
CGI in them. And like for Wanda versus Agatha, when they're even surrounded by a digitally created hex, is it difficult to sort of envision your shots and chart those out when so much of what will be there isn't there yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's various tools that can help us with that. And, we certainly used the previs quite heavily. Those sequences were previs, and we'd rely on that. But I think, it does require, imagination, when you're standing there surrounded by 150 foot of green screen in a dusty kind of parking lot or whatever, with the kind of, California sun beating down on you to kind of transport yourself into a fully kind of, cumulus nimbus, environment with, runes and, red light popping up. One of the strategies which I'd kind of developed on Ghost in the Shell and I tried to use on WandaVision was to, use interactive lighting as much as possible. So, although we were kind of in a green screen environment, when we went to the kind of, what I was calling the cumulus nimbus mode, where the cloud formations build, and it becomes like a very gray sort of, soft light. We floated a kind of massive diffusion frame over the actors so that they were lit with light that felt like you would be in that environment. And then, using the red of Wanda's magic and the kind of, purple of Agatha's magic, with interactive lighting, using, the latest LED lighting technology to stimulate, those kind of effects. So you could see the light changing on the actors' faces and so on. Those kind of tools sort of helped us definitely, and helps the actors, I think, feel more in the experience. So yeah, I think a combination of, those factors definitely helped, but it does require a shift, from these very kind of coherent sets where you were like immersed in the sitcom world, and they were very in camera.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Ghost in the Shell before, and before I let you go, I wanted to make sure I asked about your work because your resume has, it seems like you've worked in every genre, from this WandaVision with Grindhouse, Ghost in the Shell, Hot Fuzz. Like it's a wide range of projects. So what is it that sort of gets you connected and gets you interested in a project when you're pursuing something?
I mean, I think, ultimately, I love kind of great stories. I think I always have done, from a child onwards. And to me, like, when I read a project and it resonates with me on a kind of a deeper level, like maybe I can remember, like, it chimes something familiar in me, or I feel a particular scene is poignant because it's, reminding me of something that I've experienced in my own life. There's something that I'm looking for in a project that I can connect to on that level. And I think also, great actors, when they really are given the chance to excel, are kind of wonderful. And cinema is nothing without them. So I had watched, Elizabeth Olsen's work for a long time and always thought she was a special talent. And so I think the chance to work with her and Paul Bettany, who is an extraordinary actor, and to kind of see them in this ultimately this kind of epic love story, to me was something that really drew me to the project, because I think that kind of essential narrative is often something that you can kind of go back to, even on a project as complicated as this. And then I think I always like a challenge, so I always like to do something different, and whatever the project that I've done before is, I try and do something quite different the next time. And I think that process of curiosity and of exploration and of kind of pushing boundaries, and pushing myself as an artist to kind of find new forms is something that's always really both intriguing and gratifying in the process of filmmaking.
Well, it seems like WandaVision checked off a lot of those boxes for you. So it's great work on this
Yes,
series.
yeah, thank you.
uh, Everyone who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Keep in touch with us throughout this Emmy season. And Jess, thank you once again for sitting down talking WandaVision with me.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Pleasure talking to you.